An exercise in human suffering. Russia's military tactics in Ukraine have damaged and destroyed city structures, choked off supply lines, and isolated populations. But will they work? Or can Ukraine's resistance defeat one of the world's most powerful militaries? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Russia's siege tactics in Ukraine. Blaring air raid sirens, people rushing for cover, fire and emergency medical personnel bracing for injuries and deaths. Across the besieged cities of Mariupol, Kharkiv, Sumy, and Mykolaiv, this is now everyday life. The Russian military is employing lessons learned over the decades in conflicts like Chechnya and Syria. Brutal tactics aimed solely at forcing entire cities into submission. Ukrainian officials say humanitarian corridors have been targeted. Convoys with women and children are coming under heavy shelling in Mariupol, Sumy, and smaller towns around Kiev. Russian forces have been accused of using cluster bombs in civilian areas. The UN Human Rights Office says it has several credible reports indicating the use of banned munitions. The UK's defense ministry has accused Russia of targeting civilians with thermobaric weapons, better known as vacuum bombs, which, if true, amounts to a war crime. The use of unguided munitions or dumb bombs in urban settings has bolstered accusations that Russia cares little for civilian lives, all in violation of international law. Let's look quickly at the guarantees of the UN's Geneva Conventions that should be protecting civilians in Ukraine. Article 23 guarantees free passage for all medical consignments and civilians. Article 18 cites the protection of civilian hospitals and their staff. And Article 35 prohibits the use of weapons that cause widespread, long-term, and severe damage.
Ukraine is on fire. The country is being decimated before the eyes of the world. The impact on civilians is reaching terrifying proportions. Countless innocent people, including women and children, have been killed. After being hit by Russian forces, roads, airports, and schools lie in ruins. According to the World Health Organization, at least 24 health facilities have suffered attacks. Hundreds of thousands of people are without water or electricity. The United Nations and humanitarian partners are working to ensure safe passage from besieged areas and to provide aid where security permits. But the avenues in and out of encircled cities are more precarious by the day. And I underscore the crucial importance of respecting international humanitarian law.
One Ukrainian city feeling the force of Russia's military assault in violation of international law is Mykolaiv. Its location in the south has given Russian troops access to invade via Crimea. As Russia continues to attack indiscriminately from the air, Mykolaiv's governor has said, "We are winning this fight, but not this war." Well, joining me now to talk about the situation on the ground is the mayor of Mykolaiv, Oleksandr Syenkevych. Thank you so much for being with us. You know, I quoted the governor actually from a few days back. So tell us first if that is still where things stand where you are. Are you only winning the fight?
Hello, studio. Today, enemy is trying to surround the city. They kept distance between 30-50 kilometers outside of the city. They gather their troops and they simultaneously attack the city. They come closer, they hit, and they fall back. Our army is trying to keep them on the distance and not give them to move through the river South Bug. That will allow them to move next to Odessa. So we are encircled, but not in total, but in partial circle.
Okay, but do you think you can stop them from reaching Odessa via your city?
For sure, we are ready to stop them. Our civilians already in territorial defense troops. Everyone who can hold the weapon is already with it. We are ready to defend our land, our city, our women, our children, and the enemy is truly unmotivated. So when we hit them, they run away, and they don't ready to die for Putin.
I want to talk further about you saying that those Russian troops are actually unmotivated. But just quickly, at last check, about half your population had left the city. Is that still the case? You have about 500,000 people in your city, and half of them have gone.
Almost half. I would say 40%. We count this by usage of water and garbage collection.
Okay.
Now, the way to out of the city is free to Odessa. So we gather people who wants to leave the city and send them by buses. Our buses that work in the city to Odessa and then to the west.
Okay. You know, there have been very loud calls for NATO to enforce a no-fly zone. So seeing what you've been seeing, knowing that Russia's strength is really in its air assault capabilities, would a no-fly zone be a game changer for this conflict?
I would say, as for me, I don't believe that NATO will close the sky, because that will mean that NATO in this war. Right now, we were bombarded by the cluster bombs that are illegal in the world, and the main aim of this bombardment are people, human alive force. We have about 260 buildings ruined totally or partially, and most of all, people who died were civilians. Okay. So I don't believe that NATO will close the sky, but I'm sure that if we have special weapon, weapon that ready to hit aircraft, we will be ready to close it by ourselves.
Okay. In the meantime, Moscow has been arguing that the areas it's attacking actually consist of Russian-speaking people, many Russian passport holders, that they are liberating. This is their argument. And this action is part of a greater vision to reunite these areas with the Russian motherland. You, however, are a native Russian speaker, but you don't share that vision. Why not?
Putin doesn't create something new. He just copies Hitler. You remember when Hitler decided to protect Germans in Czechoslovakia.
Sudetenland, yeah.
Right. So he just copies this, let's say, idea. No one needs protection here. People in Mykolaiv use Russian language as their first language in their families, on their workplaces. So this is the only, masking for his Russian Nazism.
Okay. I mean, you've said that, Russian troops, you believe they are completely unmotivated in this fight. But is there a population that actually supports what Putin is doing?
No one is supporting here in Ukraine what Putin is doing. After the February 24th, when we got for first bombs on our city, I think everyone who felt something, good to Russia lost these feelings forever.
Then tell us more about why you think Russia is doing this, turning almost the whole world against it. You've actually said that it's a war on Western civilization, and Ukraine is the front line?
Right. Putin doesn't like everything that connected to democracy and Western civilization. So he wants to share with his Russian world to the whole world. So he hates Ukrainians because we have our own way to the civilization, to the democracy. But he wants us to be with him on the Soviet Union ruins. Well, that's what he's doing now.
Okay. Mykolaiv Syenkevych, thank you so much for that. But do stay with us, because I'd like to broaden out this discussion and introduce two new panelists. Joining me now from London is Dana Lewis. He is a journalist, political analyst, and host of the podcast Backstory. And from Washington is Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Elisabeth Braw. Thanks so much for being with us. Dana, let me start with you. Is Moscow's strategy here to really lay the groundwork with these massive air assaults, destroy as much as possible from above, then, move to the streets once large parts of the population are cleared out and occupy from there? Is that what they're doing, and are you fearful that it will work?
Well, I think any military planner, Andrea, would tell you that this is probably the most horrible war strategy that anybody has seen, and it is certainly not what people would have expected from a so-called modern army in Russia now. That's been Putin's been trying to modernize over the last 20 years since he's been in power, 22 years. So I think what they initially wanted to do was have a very quick grab at the cities in Ukraine. They thought that maybe some people might welcome them. They didn't think the Ukrainian forces would fight the fight that they have, and they are frustrated. They are broken down. The food and fuel and resupply to the Russian army has largely failed, and they are doing the only thing that they have left, and that is using a very blunt, bloody instrument to attack these cities. Artillery, multiple launch rocket systems, none of them guided munitions now, hitting cities like the mayor has just explained in Mykolaiv. And it is, really added all up. And this is what people are talking about in terms of war crimes. What is Putin's strategy now? I think, Andrea, a lot of people don't understand his end game now. And I don't think that anybody can tell you that unless they can get into his head. Right. Because he has a very bloody fight in front of him in Kiev. And then all these other cities have held out much longer, Mykolaiv included. And he needs to conquer those cities along the Black Sea in order to move along to Odessa and then seal Kiev in the north and move for regime change. But right now, they are destroying a lot, but they are not taking ground.
Okay, let me turn to Elisabeth. These so-called siege tactics helped Russia succeed in Chechnya and arguably Syria. Do you think that will ultimately define Russia's military action then in Ukraine as well?
It seems like that's where we are heading. We have already seen Ukrainian civilians being cut off from supplies, and we have to remember that that's a violation of the Geneva Conventions. The attacker, or both sides, are obliged to allow civilians access to food and medicine, and that's clearly not happening now in some places in Ukraine. The problem, though, is that there is no global police who can tell the Russians, well, you signed up to Geneva Conventions, you have to follow the Geneva Conventions. We can all tell them that they should, but they are clearly not in a mood to follow the Geneva Conventions, or indeed any rules or obligations. So unfortunately, it doesn't mean very much to tell them you're violating, you're committing war crimes potentially, and you could go to The Hague, because they don't care.
Right. And, Syenkevych, you heard Dana say there that no one can actually get into Putin's head. And that's probably the scariest part of all this. So now there's the issue as well of nuclear weapons. And some fear that Putin could eventually decide, well, if I lose, I'm taking everyone down with me. Has that thought crossed your mind?
I think he's out of his mind, for sure. And first of all, as I told you before, his main aim is Russian Nazism. So he hates everyone except Russians, and he wants Russia to be all over him. Instead of building his territory and make Russia greater, he's trying to make other countries worse and ruined. What he is doing now, he ruins Ukrainian infrastructure. Last night he bombed our plant, which is one of the main plants of Mykolaiv, who produces gas turbines for gas stations. Nothing military there. So he just ruins everything around the cities and inside the cities.
Right. Dana, I've heard a number of analysts say that, pro-Russian analysts, I must mention, that Russia really has not used the full force of its military, that it's held back in some respects. And that raises the question as to, if it could get so much worse, why can't NATO enforce this no-fly zone?
Well, they can't implement a no-fly zone because it'll put them into direct contact with Russian aircraft, and they'll have to shoot them down. And then they'll have to extend that zone into any anti-aircraft systems that may be on the edge of the zone. And those anti-aircraft systems may be inside Russia. So, I mean, there's this no-fly zone just is not going to wash with NATO countries. And so that's why the other elements of the debate began with, why doesn't Poland and some of the other NATO countries hand over their Soviet-era MiGs to the Ukrainians so that they can defend their own airspace? And I think that debate is going on, and it is even deepening. But again, that was the U.S. said that Poland wanted to hand those aircraft over to the American Ramstein Air Base in Germany, and then Germany said you can't fly those aircraft out of Germany and potentially attack Russian aircraft in the skies over Ukraine. So it became more sensitive still. But I think the Ukrainians need a way to defend their airspace. But can I mention one thing, and that is that, this horrid attack on the weekend on the military base near Lviv, they are now saying that that was launched from Russian bombers over Russian territory. So there's a case where you have incoming missiles fired from a Russian bomber, and there's no way that even if NATO had a no-fly zone in the West, that they would have been able to intercept those or to attack the aircraft involved.
Okay. Elisabeth, I can see that you agreed that, there's no way for NATO to enforce some sort of no-fly zone. And so if you also have, Poland and other countries not able to help out by even lending Ukraine some of their military hardware, it's all left up to Ukrainian resistance. We're hearing at least the narrative that Russia really wasn't prepared for how strong the resistance has been. First of all, do you think that's true? Do you think Russia was not ready for what it came up against? And what is your gut telling you? Do you think this resistance can succeed?
It's interesting when military planners do their planning and figure out how long it's going to take either themselves or the invader, if they are the defender, how long it's going to take for the invader to get to wherever the invader needs to go or wants to go. And they never take into account the human factor, meaning how willing ordinary people are to defend their country. It's always down to military capabilities, military hardware, number of soldiers. And that's where the Soviet Union went wrong in Finland 82 years ago, almost to the date. When the Red Army invaded Finland, the country of 3.5 million, thinking, oh, it's going to be a cakewalk because it's a small country, it's divided, and it's relatively poor, and they won't stand a chance. They held out for 105 days. I think the Russians have made the same mistake this time, only counting military hardware and military strength, number of soldiers, and not considering the human factor, the will of the population to defend itself, even when it looks dire. And that's clearly, that has been a huge surprise for the Russians, and maybe also for the international community to see the Ukrainians stand up like this. And but that has brought us to this horrible situation where Russia is now falling back on its plan B and using indiscriminate tactics against the Ukrainians. And I almost feel like Putin has reached a Nero stage. I think your viewers may remember Hitler's Nero command at the end of World War II, where he didn't care. He wanted to destroy other countries, but he wanted to destroy his own country as well because he had failed. And I think that's where Putin is heading now. He is destroying Ukraine, but he's also ruining Russia as a result.
Right. Elisabeth, though, it's interesting because for as many analyses as we've heard that these Russian troops are highly demoralized, they really don't want to fight in this war. Moscow is pushing the narrative that is a Western-backed narrative, that their soldiers and their population in general is as motivated as ever to finish this fight until Russia gets what it wants.
And the problem is we have no way of verifying. We have Western journalists in Russia who can talk to individual Russians, but we don't have reliable opinion polls. Even the Levada Center is under pressure, which was the one reliable pollster. So the mayor may have a different opinion, but I think if we look at the number of Russian casualties so far, it doesn't suggest a successful, motivated fighting force. How can it be that we are in the thousands of Russian soldiers killed already? If they were highly motivated, highly skilled, we wouldn't be seeing these numbers. It could be that it's not down to the individual soldiers, that they are being sent into impossible situations and are killed as a result. But we also have to remember that this is clearly not a war that is in the interest of these Russian soldiers to conduct. And it's clearly not in the interest of the Russian nation either. So it's just so hard to tell when you don't have independent pollsters.
Indeed. Mayor Syenkevych, I have to ask you this. You alluded to it in our interview earlier. Are you scared now of Russia getting away with the use of illegal weapons and war crimes? Because in instances past, when the evidence has been there, it hasn't mattered, and no one has been held responsible.
For sure, I was scared on the first day, and I would say in the first 3 days, everyone was scared because no one thought that the war can be happened in 21st century. But anyway, while these days we kind of analyzed and we, let's say, understood that the war happens, and we need to rebuild our life and to accept new tactic of this new life. So I think no one is scared now. We are ready to defend our city, and moreover, we are preparing to attack the enemy with everything what we have. Okay. For sure, we will save our city till the last ammo.
Okay. Dana, I know we don't know what the long-term strategy is here, but how concerned are you that this will not stop at Ukraine, that, you know, Putin's declaration that he wants to reunite all Russian speakers with the motherland could go as extreme as, you know, the ultimate goals of Germany had been in World War II?
Well, I think you have to take Putin at his word that not only does he not see Ukraine as a real country, but he's questioned the breakaway Baltic as well, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. He's spoken about color revolutions, that he won't stand for any more color revolutions. So he's referring there to Kazakhstan and recent violence in Kazakhstan. He's referring to Georgia. He's mentioned by name some of the countries on the Black Sea. So I think that Putin over and over again has talked about, and he has, by the way, factually said he wants NATO to roll back to 1997. So, you know, that's more than 2/3 of the NATO countries that are members of NATO right now. So I think Ukraine is a beginning. And if he is successful in Ukraine, Moldova will be next, because there's Transnistria there, and there's already Russian troops in there. And then he may push on from there. And there are countries on his border that are not members of NATO. So I think that President Putin is morally lost. He will do anything to win Ukraine. And there's 44 million people there. And whether he kills 1 million of them or 40 million of them, I think that he will just keep going. And I think that there are real concerns, Andrea. You've asked about nuclear weapons. There are real concerns that he might use a tactical nuclear weapon. He may use some of the nuclear power plants and create an environmental disaster. And then most recently, the Russians have started accusing America of running biological, chemical, medical facilities in Ukraine, which is completely ridiculous because they were in fact Soviet, a part of the Soviet germ warfare program. Some of them were plague institutes where they collected anthrax, and then they took the most virulent strains of that and they put them in missiles locked onto New York, Chicago, London. And then the U.S. went in under its threat reduction program, and they paid for the scientists to be retrained, and they got rid of the anthrax and some of those virulent samples in there, so some of the most deadly samples. But the fact that he's even saying that about the possible, biological or chemical attack, I think you have to take Putin sort of at his opposite on these things, and that the Russians might consider unleashing something like that in Ukraine on these cities that they cannot take.
Okay.
Block by block and apartment by apartment and building by building.
Right. Elisabeth, I can give you 30 seconds for your final thoughts.
Well, the most important thing that we have seen in these past few weeks is the incredible Ukrainian effort from the armed forces, but also from ordinary civilians to do that part, and that it's hugely inspiring. Unfortunately, I think we'll see a few more weeks of this. It was not a swift Russian victory. It can't be a swift Ukrainian victory simply because Ukraine is the underdog. But it's so phenomenally inspiring to see the Ukrainian effort, and I think we owe it to Ukraine to support them in any way we can, even if we can't close the skies for them.
Elisabeth Braw, Dana Lewis, Mayor Oleksandr Syenkevych, thank you all so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers, and our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember to follow us on Twitter @the_newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.